Hello everybody, Raven Knight here, and welcome back to our series going over the Ten Commandments. I hope you guys are excited to get started on this. Go ahead and open your Bibles, if you have one, to Exodus chapter 20, and also have a finger on Isaiah 44. We're going to be in both of those areas today. If you guys don't remember last time, we essentially did an introduction to the Ten Commandments. We talked about what we're going to be doing in this series on the commandments and what they basically mean to us. And I want to reiterate here something very important. I get the feeling that a lot of people do not understand the importance of the Ten Commandments. They look at it as either a bunch of old rules that we no longer need to follow, we don't need to worry about them. I have heard pastors argue that we need to do away with the Old Testament, which is absolutely ridiculous, because these commandments are the foundation for everything that is going to come later that Jesus talks about. But two, and probably even more importantly, I think a lot of people look at the Ten Commandments as outdated. They look at things like, oh man, they're outdated, and they're just a list of no's. You know, that's what I hear a lot of people say about the Christian faith. They don't want to follow the Christian faith because it's a lot of no's. No, you can't do this. No, you can't do that. No, you can't live this way. And while it is true, there are a lot of things in the Ten Commandments where they say, thou shalt not blank, there's a reason for it. And what we talked about last time was how the Ten Commandments are a gift to us. They are how we live freely, how we make a free society. And I know that sounds strange, but you're going to see how that unfolds as we go deeper into this. So like I said, go ahead and open up to Exodus 20. We're going to jump right into it. So what I want to do today is something unique. I'm probably not going to do this again with the Ten Commandments, but I'm going to talk about Commandment 1 and 2 together. Now, why am I doing this? It's kind of interesting because depending on whether you're using the Jewish translation or the Christian version of the Bible, you will look at these commandments differently. Last time we talked about the very first part of Exodus 20 where it says, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. The Jewish interpretation calls this the very first commandment. They say that this is the first commandment, and they consider commandments 2 and 3 after that to be one commandment. But we Christians tend to do it the other way. We look at that first statement as not one of the commandments, but we look at the next two as 1 and 2. It's very strange how that works. But today I do want to look at these together. And the reason why is because I think that they go hand in hand with one another. All right. So enough preamble. Let's jump right into it. Exodus 20, verse 3. You shall have no other gods before me. Now that's verse 3. You shall have no other gods before me. Now let's take a moment to take a look at that before we go into verse 4. Now, what does that mean? You shall have no other gods before me. It seems pretty clear cut. And we understand why it was given to the Israelites the way it was. Before they came out of Egypt, the Israelites had to follow the Egyptian gods. And there are a lot of Egyptian gods. In fact, it was kind of the way the Egyptians operated. If you had a problem that dealt with a certain kind of issue, you go to the god who deals with that issue. Having a problem with your crops? Well, go to the god of crops. You're having a problem with having a child? Go to the god of fertility. You're having a problem with a neighbor who's mistreating you? Go to the god of justice. The sun not coming out in the morning? Go to the god of the sun. You know, for every problem you had a god you went to. So it became very easy, but that also made it complicated when our God showed up, when Jehovah showed up, when Yahweh showed up. Moses says, guys, we need to worship this God. And they all said, well, who is he? Who's he on the pantheon? Tell us who he is. Who's our God out of all these people? And God's saying, I'm the only God. In fact, his line was, I am that I am. I am the great I am. I am the only God you will ever need. The only God you will ever worship. And he says it right here, you shall have no other gods before me. So I think the question we need to ask is, what is a God? What is a God? Let's give it a definition. A God is anything that we give authority over our time, devotion, and life. It is the answer to the questions of who created you, who do you trust ultimately, who do you look for truth, who do you look to for security and happiness, and who controls your future. The answer to those questions is your God. Now, for a Christian, you'd think, well, that's not too hard, is it? I mean, very obviously, Yahweh is our God. Jesus is our God, you know. The triune God, that is our God. We know to serve God and God alone. Pretty easy stuff, but you haven't thought much about it, which is why we need to go into the second part of this. Let's go to verse 4. Follow me on this. This is a long one. You shall not make for yourself an image in the form of anything in heaven above or on the earth beneath or in the waters below. You shall not bow down to them or worship them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sin of the parents to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing love to 1,000 generations for those who love me and keep my commandments. And that's a lot. That is a lot. We went through verse 4 all the way through verse 6. That's a lot right there. So what does that mean? What is that talking about? Let's break that down into the first part, okay? You shall not make for yourself an image. Essentially, it's an idol. A lot of people interpret this to mean you shall not make any idols. What is an idol? Well, to the Israelites, it would be something like a golden calf, which you will notice later they actually built. It will be any physical, tangible object that you treat as your God or that represents your God. So what is an idol? Well, there are some people who would bow down to a statue of Buddha. There are some people who would bow down to a picture of a certain god. There are some people who would do this. But I think that we can go even further than that. Do you know what can be an idol to some people? Movies. Money. Money is a definite idol. There are lots of people who worship money. Fame can be an idol. Games can be an idol. Success can be an idol. Why are all these things idols? Because again, they answer the question of who you give your time, devotion, and life to. Now you might say, Raven, that doesn't make any sense. How are these things idols? I don't worship them. I don't pray to them. No. You're thinking too small. You're thinking too small in that regard. Yes, worship and prayer is an important part of faith. I agree with that. But it's also about who you look to and who you dedicate your time with. I think a good way to look at it is this. When you walk out the door every day, when you get up and walk out the door, what do you always check for? Do you make sure your phone is in your pocket? Could you go a day without your phone or your wallet? Could you go a day without your watch? What is the one thing that if you were to lose it, you don't think you could function without it? For some of you, it would be a phone. For some of it would be your friends. For some of you, it would be your money. For some of you, it would be your job. I'm not saying that any of these things are bad things, nor am I taking away the importance of them. But how many of you would say your Bible? How many of you would say your faith? How many of you would say God? See, therein lies the distinction. What has become your idol? And I'll give you guys a... Now, some of you are probably thinking, and I've heard this before, Raven, what's the big deal? Okay? It's not a big deal. Some of these things are very important things. They're good things. Why is it so important to God that I not have these things worshipped? Why is it so important to God? I'm going to give you a physical, real-world example. I was planning to go on a mission trip to Japan a couple of years ago before COVID hit. And the first thing we started talking about is, what is the great spiritual difficulty of dealing with the Japanese people? They have an idol. The Japanese people in general have an idol, and it is affecting their entire culture. Their idol is success. Their idol is success. The Japanese people form their entire culture and worldview around success. How successful they are in work, in business, in making money, in being financially well off. Success is their idol. And you probably think, is success a bad thing? Well, no. But when your whole worldview is built around your success, what happens? Did you know that the birth rate in Japan is lower than the healthy average? And part of the reason for that is because so many Japanese young men hit the workforce and spend all their time and energy on work. They don't have time or the effort to put into a family, to raise a family. Did you know that the suicide rate in Japan, especially for young men in Japan, is monstrously high? And a large part of that is because if you don't get the success you so crave, quite often you don't see a reason to keep living and you take your own life because the shame of failure is too great. See, when you make success your God, once you can no longer reach success, what's the point in going forward? What's the point? And that's the difficulty they face. That's the difficulty a lot of young men in Japan face. And so they fill in the void of a lack of relationship with porn. The porn industry in Japan is fantastic. It is rising up very quickly. Hentai, all of it. It is huge in Japan. And a large part of that is because they've got a large market for it. You got a lot of people who don't have time or energy or directive to try to build up a real relationship, so they go to the porn industry. It becomes a lot easier that way. And thus, Japan is going through a major spiritual crisis. They wouldn't know it because they see success as a good thing. And that's the struggle of getting to them. Their idol has started to really negatively impact their culture. And it's a tricky idol because we don't see the problem with it. What's wrong with success? Absolutely nothing is wrong with success until success becomes your God. When success becomes your God and it's the thing you worship, what happens when you're not successful? What happens when that success pulls you away from everything else in your life? See, therein lies the problem, and it's the same with any other idol. So I ask you again, what has become your God? What has become the thing you put all of your time and energy and effort into? Let's read a little further in that next bit. In verse 5, you shall not bow down to them or worship them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sin of the parents of the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing love to 1,000 generations for those who love me and keep my commandments. Now, some of you might look at that and get a little weirded out. First part, God says he's a jealous God. Well, hold on, Raven, isn't jealousy a sin? It's not. Jealousy is not a sin, especially in this context. And I'll give you an example. If you are in a relationship with a man or woman or what have you, if you're in a romantic relationship, would you be okay with your partner in that relationship seeing other people? Would you be okay with them having an affair with someone else? Why not? Because you're jealous. You don't want them seeing other people. You love them. You want them to love you. What happens when they start seeing other people? And that's the way God feels about us. He doesn't want us seeing other idols. He doesn't want us going away from him. He's a jealous God. But then that next part gets really weird. It gets really scary, doesn't it? Punishing the children for the sin of the parents to the third and fourth generation. Does that mean God actually punishes children for the sins of their parents? He's not saying, and I think a lot of people misunderstand this, he's not saying that he punishes people because of the sins of their father. He's saying that the sins of the father often come down on the child. Think about it like this. If your father and mother do awful, terrible, evil things, does it not have an impact on your upbringing? A lot of people who had very difficult family lives often go on talk shows and radio shows talking about how awful their family was, how difficult their parent situation was. They've had to suffer with a lot because of their parents. And what God is saying here is those who hate me, those who scorn my directions, often suffer as a result. But he follows up with this. But showing love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments. Because those who love and keep the commandments of the Lord often grow up well. They get trained in how to follow God. They are trained in how to understand and interpret God's word. So that way they will be loved. They will be shown God's compassion and be shown how to go about their daily life. What God is talking about here is the eternal implications of following him over these idols. If you follow an idol, you do not have the eternity of that idol, which is where we get to Isaiah 44. We're going to open up to Isaiah 44. I need to turn to it because I don't have a second bookmark. That's on me. I need to get me one. But we're going to open up to Isaiah. Isaiah is one of the most popular prophets written about. Here we go. Isaiah 44. We're going to be in verse 6 through 20, but I'll break it down for you. What God is saying in that commandment, essentially, to recap, do not make idols, because I am a jealous God. I don't want you seeing other gods or idols. I want you to only focus on me. Why? Because those who love me and keep my commandments, I will love for generations. You will have generations of happiness. But those who defy me, you will only create generations of people who have no connection to me. See, the love for me creates long-lasting, eternal blessing. Idols do not create long-lasting, eternal blessing. And we see that as Isaiah points it out in 44, verse 6. Let's take a look at this. In verse 6, it says, verse 9. My apologies. Verse 9. All who make idols are nothing, and the things they treasure are worthless. Those who would speak up for them are blind. They are ignorant to their own shame. Who shapes a god and casts an idol which can profit nothing? People who do this will be put to shame. Such craftsmen are only human beings. Let them all come together and take their stand. They will be brought down to terror and shame. Isaiah is laying it out clear as day. There is no value in idols. None. They have no eternal worth. They're temporary, they're fleeting, and those who would defend them are fools. But let's go further. He actually gives a great example in verse 12. Watch this. The blacksmith takes a tool and works with it in the coals. He shapes an idol with hammers. He forges it with the might of his arm. He gets hungry and loses his strength. He drinks no water and grows faint. The carpenter measures with a line and makes an outline with a marker. He roughs it out with chisels and marks it with compasses. He shapes it in human form in all its glory, that it may dwell in a shrine. He cut down cedars, or perhaps took a cypress or oak. He let it grow among the trees of the forest, or planted a pine, and the rain made it grow. It is used as fuel for burning. Some of it he takes and warms himself. He kindles a fire and bakes bread, but he also fashions a god and worships it. He makes an idol and bows down to it. Do you see the irony of what's going on here? Do you see the irony? You don't yet? Keep watching. Verse 16. Half of the wood he burns in the fire. Over it he prepares his meal. He roasts his meat and eats his fill. He also warms himself and says, I am warm. I see the fire. From the rest he makes a god, his idol. He bows down to it and worships it. He prays to it and says, Save me, you are my God. Now do you see the irony? Still don't? Isaiah's got you. They know nothing. They understand nothing. Their eyes are plastered over so they cannot see, and their minds closed so they cannot understand. No one stops to think. No one has the knowledge or understanding to say, half of it I used for fuel. I even baked bread over its coals. I roasted meat and I ate. Shall I make a detestable thing from what is left? Shall I bow down to a block of wood? Such a person feeds on ashes. A deluded heart misleads him. He cannot save himself or say, Is not this thing in my right hand a lie? Do you see the irony now? If you still haven't, I'll explain it. Idols are temporary things made by human hands. How can something you made be your God? How can something created by you be your God? He lays it out pretty clearly. The carpenter cut down a tree. He took part of the wood and he made a fire to bake his bread. He also made the fire to keep him warm. But with that same wood that he used to help himself, he then creates a God that he worships and asks to save him. Do you see the irony of this? And that is exactly why God says, Those who love me I will bless eternally. Those who hate me and follow idols will be cursed eternally. Because you put your faith into something that you cannot have as a God. You put your faith into something detestable. How foolish can you get? No, really, how foolish can you get that you put all of your faith into something temporary? This is why I think these two verses or two commandments go so well together. You shall have no gods before me, because all other gods cannot be what I am. Don't make idols because they're temporary. They're meaningless. They have no power. Why would you worship them? Why? You know, if your idol is video games, what do video games do for you? What happens when the power goes out? Well, there goes your God. If you worship success like the Japanese culture seems to, what happens when you fail? When you don't get the promotion or the success that you need, what are you going to do? See, that's the difference. I worship the Lord our God. I worship Jesus Christ. Because even in bad times, even in tough times, I know He's there. I know He loves me. I know I'm blessed because of Him. Jesus promised us. He said, your life will not always be easy. Following me is not the easy way, but you will be blessed. So today I challenge you to ask these questions. Ask these questions to yourself. Who created you? Who is your creator? Who do you trust ultimately? Who do you look to for the truth? Who do you look to for security and happiness? Who controls your future? If your answer to any of those 5 questions was not Jesus, you have some soul searching to do. And if it was Jesus, if you answered with Jesus as the answer, then really evaluate yourself. Have you held fast to that? Now, I'm not here to judge anyone. I think all of us have been guilty of sort of making idols out of something at one point in our lives. We've all looked at something temporary or fleeting and kind of really put a lot more stock and value into it than we should have. And again, I'm not saying that success, video games, movies, money, fame, any of that is necessarily a bad thing. I'm not saying that. What I am saying, and what I think we really need to take away from this, is that those things are fleeting and God loves us more than they ever will. You shall have no gods before me, and you shall not make for yourselves idols. Don't worship gods besides me, and don't make new ones out of nothing. Could you imagine that? Imagine for a minute you are married to a woman and she starts sleeping around with a sex doll or going out with a sex doll. How sad must you feel that the person you love the most has put more value into an inanimate object than you? That's probably how God feels when you start worshiping things like video games or money. Pretty messed up. Like I said, guys, this is going to be heavy. We are really, really diving into these commandments, and we got more to go. Next time we're going into commandment number 3, and I am excited. This is going to be really cool. The 3rd commandment is actually one that I think a lot of people misunderstand. It's, thou shalt not use my name in vain, and I think people don't understand that verse at all. They think it means one thing when in reality there's a deeper meaning to it. I look forward to next Sunday, guys. It's going to be great. Anyway, that's all we got time for today. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in my next video. Take care.